Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode, we shall be doing another Tales of a Tournament Gamer, the semi-regular series where I regale you with some of the crazy tournament experiences that I have had over my long and sordid 40k career. And when I say crazy, I do mean truly insane. In previous installments, I've shared the tale of when I was threatened with a crossbow. I've had a Tau player get in my face and try and engage in real-life melee combat. And on two separate occasions, I have made Eldar players cry. If all of that sounds bonkers and it has piqued your interest, then don't worry, I'll make sure to link another one of these Tales of a Tournament Gamer episodes at the end of this one. But now let us focus on the main event, today's story. And I have to say that I have been very hesitant to share this particular tale because it is quite dark. In fact, it very well may be the darkest tale of a tournament gamer that I have. Fair warning, this is not for the faint-hearted. This is the story of Big John. Our story takes place a long time ago, right towards the beginning of my competitive 40k career. I was just getting into the tournament scene proper. In fact, this was back in mid 6th edition. It was so early on that we didn't even have the 6th edition Guard Codex yet. We were still having to make do with the old 5th edition one. Small side note, but that old 5th edition Codex was probably my favorite one of all time, just because it had so many crazy, wacky, kooky things that you could pull off with it. It was a very, very flavorful codex that allowed Guard to pull off a variety of playstyles. You could run Air Cav with Valkyrie and Vendettas. Popular tactic with the codex was to do Imperial Guard Leaf Blower. This is where you took a bunch of veterans because they were troops and you could put them inside chimeras and you could fire all of the plasma guns and melter guns out of the top of those chimeras, and that meant that you could blow away loads of enemy units whilst your infantry stayed safe inside the vehicles. But my way of using the 5th edition codex was, of course, pure infantry guard. If you're a veteran of this channel, you will be very firmly aware of my love of the infantry. But if you're new, let me briefly explain. I am an infantry guard commander at heart. I always say it comes down to the infantryman and his rifle. And my favorite way of playing the game, as has been for years and years, has been pure infantry. Just wave after wave of soldiers charging forward, ready to drown the enemy in blood and bayonets. These days, I think it's fair to say that I am a seasoned infantry commander, but back when our tale is set, I was very much getting to grips with the whole concept, and a couple of things had inspired me to try it out. Firstly, it had been down to some real-world logistics. I'd gone to university, I'd only had limited capacity to carry my models with me, I'd had to leave my tanks at home. I'd taken basically one carry case that was just full of my infantry. And so I'd kind of been forced to try this out. But even when I've been able to go back home and get the rest of my army, I had ended up sticking with this because I'd quite enjoyed the challenge of just using lots and lots of infantry. I started to figure out how it would work, have commissars here, have preachers there. But also, and this is going to be a blast from the past for a few of the longbeards in the video, I had been reading an old series of battle reports by a user on Daka called Alarios. And there's going to be some people right now that are really feeling the member berries when I say blood conquers all. Oh, those battle reports, oh my days, they were written, they had a narrative part, they had a game breakdown part, and they were done very much in the style of the old White Dwarf bat reps. And it was so much fun following Alarios and his Folian 1st Infantry Army as he also was unlocking the secrets of this. And his battle reports really inspired me to go all in on this particular way of using the Guard. Now, between reading the hilarious battle reports on Daka Daka and learning from them, and also playing my own practice games, I was starting to hone in on what was to become the very first Mordian Glory competitive pure infantry army. And there had been a lot of mistakes made along the way. At first, I hadn't properly blobbed my guys together, because you could take 50-man squads of infantry. I mean, we think it's good in 10th edition where you can take like 20, 25-man blobs. That's just peanuts to 5th edition. You could take 50-man blocks of conscripts, 50-man blocks of infantry. It was just wild. And I hadn't taken many support characters, so I'd had incidences where I'd lose a few men and then I'd fail my morale test. And back then, if you failed a morale check, you could potentially run off the board and lose the whole squad. So I'd taken some hard knocks, but every loss that I had endured had allowed me to learn more and more, until we finally arrived at this army. Now, I can't remember exactly what was in this army list, because it was about 12 years ago when I ran it, but I do know the two most important parts, the big tricks that it could pull out of the bag. The first one was the ability to outflank an entire platoon. This was done by a special character that was called Captain Al-Rahem. He was a leader of the Talan Desert Raiders, but there weren't any separation between regiments. You could have Creed, and you could have Strachan, you could have Harker, and you could have Talan units all working alongside each other, very much like it is in 10th edition today. And Captain Al-Rahem's big thing is that he could outflank an entire unit. Now, in 10th edition, we're very familiar with being able to just put stuff in strategic reserve, and for that to be able to come in on left board edge, right board edge, or later on even your opponent's board edge. But that wasn't how it used to be. It used to be basically Dawn of War deployment every single time, and if you had reserves, they could only come in from your board edge unless they specifically had rules like outflank, and then that allowed you to come on either one side or the other. Now, most armies that could outflank could do so with 1 or 2 units, and so you might have 5 scouts come in from the side, or you might have some Kroot that had been able to flank round. But Captain Al-Rahem let you outflank his whole platoon. Now, bear in mind that a platoon could at minimum consist of a command squad and 2 10-man units, and at maximum could consist of a command squad, 5 infantry squads, 50 conscripts, 3 heavy weapon squads, 3 special weapon squads, and then dedicated transports for every single one of those units. It was entirely possible to outflank thousands of points. Of course, if you did that, you would start with very little on the board, and then you'd probably end up losing the mission. But what I used to do with Captain Al-Rahem is outflank 100 dudes, or 95 to be specific. I had 4 infantry squads, which I didn't blob up, 4 separate infantry squads, and then I had the command squad with Captain Al-Rahem, and then I had 50 conscripts. If you're new to Guard and only started with the 9th or 10th edition codex, you might not be aware of the true meme that was the old Imperial Guard conscript unit. It was something that we could take up until the end of the 8th edition Guard codex, and essentially it was just meat waves, just pure cannon fodder. Each conscript cost either 3 to 5 points depending on the edition, and they came equipped with a lasgun, and that was it. And they had no special weapon options, no heavy weapon options. It was just blokes with lasguns. In fact, the old joke, I believe it was in the 5th or 6th edition codex, was that conscripts cost 3 points. So it cost you 1 point for the lasgun, 1 point for the flak armor, 1 point for the close combat weapon. Human filling came free. These conscripts were truly terrible though, because they only hit on 5s, both in shooting and combat. Their leadership was horrendous. More often than not, if they were going to take any casualties, you'd have to roll a double 1, or they would just run off the board. But they were very, very cheap, and this meant that they were a great way of getting pure numbers onto the battlefield. At the end of the day, every single one of those conscripts is still a wound that your opponent has to chew through. But what took conscripts from a meme to a dream was good old Commander Chenkov, the Valhallan Ice Warrior special character in the 5th edition Codex. This guy was described as being an absolute taskmaster, never afraid to expend the lives of his men if it always meant that he could achieve his missions. In one particularly gruesome story, he used to clear minefields by just marching ranks of men over them, because that was quicker than clearing them properly. And his special ability was send in the next wave. Any unit of conscripts in your army could be upgraded, and it was either for 50 or 75 points. It was quite expensive, but if you did upgrade them with send in the next wave, it meant that every time that unit died at the beginning of your next turn, it just came back. Full strength, marched right onto the board. So between these two characters and their respective platoons, I was fielding over 200 infantry. And when you take into account the fact that half of those were respawning and the other units that were in the army, like company command squads, heavy weapon teams, overall the force got up to about 250 infantry, of which 100 was constantly respawning conscripts. But that covers the list and my early fumblings under the blanket with Pure Infantry Guard. But what does this have to do with the tournament? Well, after many weeks of practice games, I decided it was time to take it to the next level. I wanted to go to a tournament and see how Pure Infantry Guard would perform. As luck would have it, there was a local 1-day 3-round RTT that was taking place that month, right near where my brother lived. And so we decided to sign up to it together. He had been practicing with his Tau. I'd been getting my infantry to where I wanted it. We thought it would be a great opportunity for us to go together, and then after the event we can share our experiences, have a few drinks and celebrate or commiserate depending on how we did. And this is where Big John enters our story, because he was my game 1 opponent. Now, I actually knew John from before this event. He was a well-known player at this club that was local to my brother, and he had a bit of an infamous reputation. Not on a personal level, you understand. He was a lovely guy, but he was a power gamer. He always ran the hardest stuff that he could. He often would run Chaos armies, but he was open to running other factions as well. But when Hell Drakes were broken, and I know some people listening to this right now will think that's a laughable statement, but when they were first released, taking Triple Hell Drake was meta dominating, and John was running that right from the get-go. The moment that he could, he was running with it. And it was kind of dominating our local scene for a while. But then with 6th edition came the advent of the psychic power invisibility, which literally made one of your units invisible. I won't get into specific details, but it made it almost untargetable. You could only ever hit it on 6s at best, and you couldn't target it with any kind of blast weapons. And Chaos had a specific build that was called Screamer Star. It was a Screamer Demon Death Star. And the whole thing was that you could take this invisible unit and you could give it a 2+ rerollable invulnerable save. And there were no mortal wounds in the game. There was no way of ignoring invulnerable saves. You had a giant blob of screamers. I think they could be taken in unit sizes of 10 or larger. And every single one of these things had a 2+ rerollable invulnerable save, and you could barely ever hit them. It was one of the first Death Stars. In my mind, I would always say that Farsight Bomb was the first true competitive Death Star that emerged in competitive 40k, but Screamer Star was not far behind it, and this thing was almost unstoppable. Very, very few players were able to counter it, especially in a relatively low-key local meta that like we had at this club near my brother. So naturally, Big John was using this thing. Not only was it chaos, but it also very much was the cutting edge of the meta for the time. But some of you might be wondering why he was called Big John. Well, to put it delicately, he was a big lad. He was very tall, well over 6.5 foot, but he did also come with some extra packaging, shall we say. And the root cause of this was more than likely his unhealthy eating habits. At any point during any tournament or any game that he was playing at the club, he would be hoovering down mountains of cheesy chips, which were sold by the venue. And I want to make one thing abundantly clear. I'm not disparaging or shaming the guy in any way, shape, or form. I fully understand that it takes all sorts of people to make a world, and everyone is unique and different in their health and their lifestyle. I myself am not exactly any Derek Zoolander or male model. The only reason I am mentioning it is it will become relevant later on in the story. But now let us get to the game itself. After John and I exchange the usual pleasantries and we chat for a little bit, it starts getting down to deployment. Now, John's deployment is very straightforward. He takes his big unit of screamers and he front lines the whole thing because they've got a really good invulnerable save, and as long as he can get first turn, he should be able to get that 2+3 rollable just going straight away. The rest of his army consists of mostly chaff, unit of cultists here, unit of horrors there. Really, they're just there to hold objectives and to sit back quietly while the Screamer runs around winning in the game. The other major unit of note was his Demon Prince. This was the unit that was providing a lot of the buffs to the Screamer star, and it really was the key to the whole thing. If that army got first turn, then he would put all the buffs on the Screamers, and that would basically be it. It'd just be off he goes. As for my own deployment, I put Captain Aurahem and his whole platoon in reserve. I then take the remaining 150 infantry or so that I've got, and I deploy in 3 lines. I've got my conscripts at the front, I've got my infantry squads behind, and then behind that I have got my command squads and my heavy weapon teams, things like my las cannons, my mortars, and my missile launchers. What's significant about this deployment though is that whilst both of our initial armies started off basically facing off against each other in the center, because the objectives were player placed as it was back in the day, they were actually on the flanks. So the center fight was a big spectacle, but it wasn't actually where the points were going to be scored. We then roll off to see who gets first turn, and John wins it. This is very bad for me because it means that now his Screamer star, which I might have had a chance of damaging before it went full strength, is fully powered up. It flies forward and crashes into my conscript blob, completely annihilating it. And that is his first turn. It then comes over to my turn 1, and those 50 conscripts that just died march right back onto the battlefield because send in the next wave. This was a really big deal because it meant that in a game that only had 6 turns, my opponent had just wasted one of those, just killing a unit that didn't mean anything. In my turn 2, it was mostly spent me just putting some shots into the Screamer star, but it became very obvious very quickly that I was wasting my time. So I end up focusing on the chaff. I just think, well, you know what, I'll just kill what I can kill. So between some mortars and some long-range special weapon and heavy weapon shots, I was able to clear away a reasonable amount of the smaller units in the Demon Army. But that Screamer star, it was coming for me, and turn 2 for the demons and for the chaos saw it slam into one of my infantry units and again just completely demolish it. John was clever. He didn't fall for the same trick twice unless he had to. He went for the infantry that wasn't going to come back. But then this meant that my conscripts were kind of like marching around the board and he was sort of stoically refusing to engage them. But by not engaging them, he was leaving 50 guys just unmolested. And sure, they're only conscripts, but when it's 50 conscripts going up against 10 cultists, I'm actually going to win that firefight fairly easily. And so what ends up happening is one of my units of conscripts gets quite close to the middle of the board, and therefore I start getting into range and stuff, and I start doing a lot of damage, and his chaff is disappearing all around him. But as quickly as I'm killing his chaff, he's just munching through the rest of my army. Until it gets to turn 3. And that's when Captain Al-Rahem makes his appearance. 100 infantry suddenly appear on the left flank, right where my opponent's home objective is, and also where one of my home objectives was as well, because I just come all the way down that entire side of the board. Charging onto the board, shouting war cries, blazing away with las guns, I'm able to not only take John's objective off him, but also secure my own. But here comes the next level of bullshit. Because my Captain Al-Rahem platoon had outflanked, because that platoon also contained some sending the next wave conscripts, it meant any time that those conscripts died, rather than coming back on my board edge, they could come back on the same board edge that they had appeared from, which was the outflanking one. So now, John has got 50 never-ending conscripts which are in range every time he kills them to just respawn back onto his home objective. And the really, really big deal is his Screamer Star was completely out of position. I had been throwing units and I'd been pulling him over to the right-hand flank because there was one objective over there, and I wanted him to think that's where my main focus was going to be. So his Death Star is completely in the wrong place when the master plan is revealed, the great flanking maneuver unveiled, and actually it turns out that by the end of the game, I am comfortably holding my home objective on my left of the board. I'm taking his objective off to him on his side of the board in his deployment zone, and then there's one objective that's on the right-hand flank on my side, which is just stoically being defended by a unit of just infantry that he's just slowly chewing through with his screamers, but I'm just sort of forming moving blocking lines, so he's struggling to get through it quick enough. And then he's got one unit that is holding an objective that's on the far right hand side of the board. We get to the end of the game and we look at the points, and it ends up being a draw because he contests one of my objectives and he holds one. I control 2 primary objectives, but when it comes to the secondaries, things that used to be like First Blood and Linebreaker and Warlord, he's got a few more of the secondaries than I do. So it ends up being a stone dead draw. We get the TO over, and the TO says, okay, so in the event of a draw overall on primary and secondary and stuff like that, we have a tiebreaker in the mission pack, and it's a custom tiebreaker. This is how crazy events used to be back in the day. They had all these things like tiebreakers that TOs would just like make up. Sometimes it's a coin flip. But in this case, the TO had the tiebreaker as how many force organization slots you had wiped out. Now, the force org back in the day was a little bit like the old detachments, sort of 8th and 9th edition. And everyone could take 1 to 2 HQ choices. You could take 2 to 6 troop choices, and then you had 3 elites, 3 heavy support, and 3 fast attack. Now, for most armies, that would mean that 1 troop choice would equal 1 squad, because a Spaceman Tactical Squad takes up 1 slot on the force organization chart. And so for the demons, what had happened is I had killed these cultists, and they were 1 slot, and I'd killed these horrors, and they were 1 slot, and I'd taken out one of his HQs, one of the minor characters, and that was 1 slot. So it turns out that I'd actually killed like 5 force organization slots. I'd killed 5 units. John when hearing this news, gleefully announces, oh, well, I've obviously won then because I've just killed like 20 of your units. And I say, well, actually, I asked the TO, I go, just to be clear, is it units or is it Force Org slots that have been wiped out? And the TO says, no, very specifically, it is Force Organization slots that have been destroyed. And I turn to John and I shrug my shoulders and say, well, sorry, mate, but that means I've won. And the look on his face, he goes bright red. And he's like, what do you mean you've won? I've wiped out so much of your army. And I say, well, in the Guard, we don't have the usual way of building our force. We have platoons. And so technically, via the Force Organization slot, I have only got 2 HQs and 2 troop choices in this entire thing. And he just looks at me with this pure look of disbelief. And I go, look, I get my codex out and I show him and I show the TO, and the TO's pissing himself with laughter because he knows John's a power game and he knows that he's come here to win the event. And he's like, yeah, that's right. You've not wiped out a troop choice. And I go, no, you've wiped, there's like 1 squad left over from here. There's a command squad left over here. I've got my full Al Rahem platoon you've basically not touched. The conscript's still running around. So yeah, you have killed about 20 units, but no full slots from the Force Org chart. And you can just see how like pissed John is. But he composes himself fairly well, but he's not happy at all. And it was not the start to the event that he wanted, because he had come here with the most meta thing. And he had just had a really difficult game because he had gone into this just assuming that he was going to destroy me. There'd been a lot of pre-game dick waving. Oh, sorry about this matchup, mate. Oh, it's not a good one for Guard, all this kind of stuff. But as the game had progressed, it had got increasingly more obvious that, sure, he had the killing power, but I was just everywhere all of the time. And he was killing infantry, but it wasn't really doing all that much. And so it had been a very stressful game. The flops had been there. And then to get to the very end and to find out that on a technicality, you've not actually won the game. In fact, you've lost the game, wasn't the best start for old John. I'm on top of the world because I've won my first game, and not only that, it's against the infamous Screamer Star. Everyone had said I didn't have a chance, and yet just by overwhelming him with outflanking and pure bloody numbers and a refusal to get intimidated, the old infantry guard had managed to hold the line. So I'm on top of the world. John isn't so happy. After grumpily tidying up his models and resetting them for the next game, it's lunch. And between mouthfuls of his usual order of extra large cheesy chips, he can be heard from across the gaming hall loudly complaining to anyone that would listen about the bullshit of my list and how unfair it was in the rules pack that he'd lost on this technicality, as he called it. And he's getting visibly stressed out. You can see it physically on him with the sweat and with how bright his face is. And he's kind of working himself up into this vortex of doom and anger. And then game 2 rolls around. And poor old John just had no luck going his way. Because of the fact that he had only just lost his game on the final tiebreaker, which essentially put him at the very top of the losers bracket. It meant that when it came to doing pairings for round 2, there were an uneven number of players, and so he ended up pairing upwards into the winners bracket, which was then randomized, and he drew JP, who was our resident Eldar player and by far our best player at this club. I mean, it wasn't even close. Any tournament that was run, whether it was a GT or an RTT, JP always won it. Not only was he running a very good faction, but he had a very good grasp of the rules. Very skillful player. And I think at one point he ended up playing for Team England. So he knew what he was doing. And so game 2, obviously I wasn't involved in this, but I could sort of see it out the corner of my eye, did nothing to improve John's mood, because he just got bent over and spanked very, very hard. And he was not into it. And so by the end of round 2, not only has he lost to my meme army, but then he's had the unfortunate pairing of going into our best player, the guy that's on track to win the tournament, and he's just been spanked again. This is not what should be happening. He has Screamer Star. He should be dominating the scene. But now he is 0-2 down. Small side note for anyone that is curious, in my game 2, I ended up pairing into a Dark Angels player who had a pure Terminator army. I basically did no damage to him over the course of the game, but I was still able to win, even though I lost 450 respawning conscripts. Truly, it was glory to the first man to die. But then we get to round number 3, the final round of the day, and John ends up getting paired into my brother and his Tau. Up until this point, my brother hadn't had the best run at the event. He was also 2 games down, and this was largely in part due to the fact that he had a very out-of-date Tau army. He'd bought it on release in 3rd edition and basically added no models to it. So he had things like hammerheads with rail cannons, which at the time were considered unusably bad because we're in a world where 2+ rerollable and vulnerable save is a thing. One shot, it doesn't matter how powerful it is, it doesn't ignore vulnerable saves, there's no death wounds, no mortal wounds. This is 6th edition, it's back in the past. It just means it's just going to bounce every single time. So on paper, this game looked like an absolute slam dunk for Big John. Not only was he facing against a shooting army, something which Screamer Star readily just tore through, but also it was one that had a lot of one-shot weapons, literally the worst thing that you could take against his army. And he really wanted to win it. There was a lot of pressure on Big John because whoever lost this game was at serious risk of getting the wooden spoon. Now, my brother didn't really care either way how it went. He'd like to win the game, but he's very much like me. He goes to tournaments, he plays his games. If he wins, he wins. If he loses, he loses. At the end of the day, afterwards, he's going to have a beer and some victory chicken. But John really wanted to win it because the shame, the terrible shame, the dishonor, sir, the disgrace, sir, that would be, well, not heaped on upon him by us, but he would heap upon himself in his own mind if not only that he went to a tournament with Screamer Star, but he came last with that. When he's got a reputation as being one of the better players at this club, when he is known as a whacker power gamer, that's just, he couldn't handle that. That wasn't acceptable. With all of that said, Big John and Mordy Bro start getting into the game. They deploy their armies and then they roll off for first turn. And Big John gets it, which is good because then he can get all of his spells off, his buffs up, and he's able to have that 2+ rerollable save. He bum rushes everything forward to the Tau. And he obliterates the initial screening line of Croup, and he just has to get through the second line, and then he is in amongst the Tau main firepower. There's nowhere they can go. Haven't got the mobility to escape him. So he just has about 3-4 rounds of combat and he's going to win the game. That's how he sees it. Then it comes over to turn 1 for Mordy Bro. My brother asks Big John, what is the unit in your army that is handing out this 2+ rerollable armor save with invisibility and all this madness? And Big John says, it's my Demon Prince. He also is benefiting from all this stuff. And so my brother says, well, you know what? I'll give it a go. And he takes his Hammerhead, the one Hammerhead in his army that has had the same rail cannon since 3rd edition. It's an OG Tau tank. And he fires the shot. He needs a 6 to hit. He gets the hit. He only needs like a 2 to wound because this weapon is so much stronger than the toughness of the Demon Prince, and he gets the 2 to wound. It then goes over to Big John, who confidently announces he has a 2+ rerollable. He rolls the dice, and he gets a 1. He visibly reddens, beetroot color, and tries to nonchalantly play it off, but he picks up the dice, throws it down to re-roll it, and it lands on a 1. This means that the Demon Prince, because of the instant death rule that stated if the weapon strength is double or more the toughness of the model it's shooting at, it doesn't matter how many wounds it's got, it will instantly die. The Demon Prince is sent back into the warp, back into the abyss from whence it came. And John's entire strategy, the thing his entire army is built around, just disappears in a poof of smoke. Without that Demon Prince, his army is nothing. Those screamers are going to get cut to pieces, torn down in a heartbeat by the rest of the Tau firepower. This was the first shot that my brother did in the entire game. Upon seeing the dice go into a 1 again, my brother lets out a huge cheer. Huzzah! Yes! He's only gone and done it. He has defeated the beast! John's reaction is his eyes bulge. And he gets his hand and he slams it down onto the Demon Prince model, completely destroying it, fragmenting it into 1,000 parts, and then sweeping his arm across the rest of his army, scattering it onto the floor. My brother involuntarily goes, "What the fuck, man? You can still win!" Just trying to be nice to John, trying to placate him. But it becomes apparent that this isn't a fit of rage. This isn't someone throwing their toys out the pram and having the most epic tabletop meltdown. Because John falls to his knees and his eyes roll into the back of his head and he keels over onto his back on the floor, passed out. There is an awful, terrible, long moment of silence as everyone stops talking, turns around, and looks at what has happened. And then my brother springs into action. He shouts out, "Medic!" and then rushes over to John's side of the table to check to see if he's okay. He's passed out, but he is breathing and he has got a pulse. My brother puts him into the recovery position in case he vomits, doesn't want to choke on that. And within 10 minutes, an ambulance has arrived. The tournament's come to a complete standstill. Everyone's making sure everything's okay. And the paramedics arrive, they check him over, and then straight away, they put him on a stretcher and they put him in the back of the ambulance and they whisk him away. Obviously, with all of this going on, the event has come to a complete standstill and has been heavily disrupted. A lot of players are pretty upset and distressed, but after a few minutes, we end up chatting to the TO, and everyone comes to the same conclusion that there's not really much more we can do. We might as well just finish off our games, play the tournament out, and at least, finish the event. The TO gets some contact information for John's family, and whilst we're all wrapping up our games, he calls them and lets them know what has happened. Now, that's the end of the tournament, but it's not the end of our tale. You see, about 9 months go past, and no one's heard from John. My brother plays at that club regularly for the game nights, and he's not there. I visit my brother whenever they do a tournament, and John's not there. And we're obviously all a bit worried about him, because obviously we're worried that he might have died. The good news is that he hasn't. Out of nowhere, like I said, about 9 months later, he just attends one of the tournaments, and he's completely changed. Like, I don't recognize him when I see him. And he's had a haircut, he's shaved his beard, and he has lost so much weight. The guy is like stick thin. And we all, obviously, when we see who it is, we go, John, oh my God, how are you doing, man? Oh, we were so worried about you. And obviously, after we've all sort of said hello to him and made sure he's okay and everything, he ends up explaining what happened. It turns out when he came round at hospital, the doctors obviously checked him over, made sure he's okay and everything. And they explained to him that what had happened is, and forgive me, I'm not a medical expert, so if this isn't the right terminology, please forgive me. The doctors explained that he had suffered a heart murmur, or like a minor heart attack essentially, which had been brought on by a combination of going through a hyper stressful event, which had been the tournament, and him getting so worked up over losing his games, and combining that with an unfortunately unhealthy lifestyle, it's the best way of putting it. He wasn't in the best shape. And so basically what John did is he took 9 months away, completely worked on himself, got himself in shape, and also worked on his attitude towards the game. And when you played him, it was like playing a different person. Suddenly, there was none of the bluster, none of the worry, none of the stress. All of that was gone. He was running a very fluffy Chaos Space Marine army, and he was just the most chilled out dude ever. And he even said that basically before what happened, he was a bit of a power gamer. And what the whole thing did is make him have a good, long, hard look at himself, because no one wants to go through that, let alone over a game of toy soldiers. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the man formerly known as Big John. Now, he's just regular John, and as far as I'm aware, he's still playing 40k to this day. And a funny side story to end the video on. I initially told this story on stream, and when I did, one of the comments that was left was that hammerhead had fired a rail cannon shot so powerful that it had gone through the Demon Prince and into John's heart. And the stream, being full of ogre brains that it is, ended up dubbing that hammerhead Heartbreaker. But that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And don't forget, as always, to subscribe to never miss an episode and smash that like button.
Shot to the heart, and you're too late.
Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the Call of Duty. So a massive thank you to Bon Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, August Vardy, and the Tommies. Thank you guys, your incredible support makes a huge difference and it is a big part of how I'm able to do Mordy and Glory full time. But that's all for now, thank you for watching and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.